Finally, the power is approved, and I'll tell you a little story here in a second. I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead. So we've got the power permanent connection set up according to the specifications of zoning, according to the specifications of the electrical rules and regulations, and we're ready for AEP to come out here and connect us. But here's the challenge. The inspector comes out, tell you a little story. It's not necessarily his fault. I'm not sharing this information to degrade what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. But he came out here and he said, this doesn't look like a farm. I can't approve the electrical because this doesn't look like a farm. And isn't that a common problem? A farm doesn't look like anything except agricultural land when you're just getting started. And this is a challenge that you're going to face as well. So he says, well, this doesn't look like a farm. I said, well, I'll be raising goats. And goats need an electric fence because goats, I don't want to be chasing them all over the neighborhood. And he says, well, I don't see a house. I said, well, goats don't need a house. You know, I can stay in a tent and maintain these goats because the USDA has requirements about people, animal welfare. And in order for me to meet those requirements for animal welfare, I've got to make sure I have power, and can't have water before I have power. He says, well, you can't have power before you have a farm. Now, I didn't want to be a dick, and we worked it out, and I'm exaggerating a little bit so that you can see how this stuff works. Because again, there's no bad blood with this. This is just, we came to an agreement. But the underlying factor is that most farms don't look like anything. The 5 miles of trails, the mile of road, the forest mulched areas, the storage areas, it doesn't look like anything to somebody who's not doing this. So you're going to have the same challenges. They're going to say, well, you don't have a real farm because you don't have permanent fences. You don't have a real farm because you don't have pastures. You don't have a real farm because you don't have the smells associated with farms. See, this farm is going to smell like woods because the goat, for all he knows, the goats could have been a half mile back there in the woods, right? They could have had temporary fences set up with batteries, and they could be doing their goat thing back there. Now, I can hear chickens. They're not my chickens, but I can hear chickens nearby. You hear that? But ultimately, though, a farm doesn't have to be what most people think it is. And so what is this as far as farm is concerned? First off, there are 3 conservation areas on this farm, water conservation areas. They're called exclusion areas, and they were established where no animal or livestock will enter, no humans will enter, and those areas are around slopes. And the only reason we would enter that area is for erosion management with an approved written plan. That's an agricultural activity. The second agricultural activity is the woods here have been timbered in the past. Now, they weren't replanted, but the timber opportunity of this for pulp, for fiber, or for actual trees. Now, you can tell by these trees that these are going to be 20 years in, but forestry is an agricultural activity. This land also has habitat establishment for wildlife conservation. That also is an agricultural activity. Now, forestry falls under agriculture in the state of Virginia. Now, I was told with the RV down here that I can't have anybody living in that RV. I said, great, nobody's going to live in the RV, but they could be out here in wall tents, and they could be using the RV, and they could be staying out here from time to time, especially when we have animals on the land, because not only do I have a requirement to contain the animals. Did you know in the state of Virginia, as an agricultural property, functioning under the rules of agriculture, you're obligated to install perimeter fencing. It's not an option. You are to install boundary fencing, or you can choose to leave it open, depending on the types of activities you're doing, because of course forestry activities, different things. But if you choose to leave it open, your neighbor wants to enclose their property, you're obligated to pay half of that fence when it comes up. The same way as if I put up a fence, the neighbor's required to pay half of that fence if they're going to conduct agricultural activity, unless they choose to leave their land open. This is a rule from the 1800s, and it is a requirement by law. So before I can put animals on here, I can start installing fences. I can also use temporary fencing. I can have fencing that's not on the boundary. But again, animal containment is a requirement. Power is necessary to contain goats because an electric fence is a pain barrier not a physical barrier when it comes to goats. So if I'm running goats and I'm running pigs and I'm running things like that, I can't have them out on the property until I have power. Now I could use solar chargers and I could use battery packs, and that would work. But there's not really enough sun here to run the solar packs, and I don't want to have a bunch of animals out here if I don't have consistent power. I see battery and generator as a backup source. And of course, if we have solar, that would be a backup source, but then I wouldn't have water in place. And in order to put a well in, yes, I could run a well pump off of solar, but in order to run a well, they will suck the water up as deep as I need to suck it up. Need to have power. So there's going to be a lot of this or that, or this before that, where it's going to bind. It's a catch-22. No matter how you look at it, it's a catch-22. I can't put animals on this land until I have power. And the inspector wasn't going to allow me to have power until I had animals on the land and could demonstrate to him that it was a farm. Now, of course, I'm demonstrating it's a farm because of all these videos I'm doing to show you that it's got recreational activity, it's got access points for agricultural use. I've cleaned up all my old fence lines. I've got paddocks set up. I've got the fungus growth. I've got the forestry activities, the things that we talked about before. There's even some possible quail habitat. They're all agricultural activities. In the state of Virginia, it is a right to farm state. And so I'm able to do these things. Now he said, well, if a neighbor complains about somebody living in an RV, we'll have to send the inspector out. But according to the USDA, I have to criminally trespass anybody who enters this farm and violates biosecurity associated for this farm. Because the trespassing could bring in seeds, it could bring in contamination elements, it could bring in tree diseases, and it's the same as if you would be taking water out of one creek and putting it into another creek. That is an EPA regulation. And by the way, remember, my background is risk management, so I go ahead and read all these rules. I've read the zoning and the bylaws, I've read what's applicable and what's special use permit. I already know what the rules are. And so when an inspector comes along who's expecting me not to know the rules and says, hey, well, you got to do this before we can do that, we can usually talk it out. Now, again, I'm a little sensational in the videos. I try to be neighborly and have a good conversation with the people that are on the property, but I'm getting tired. I'm getting frustrated. And so I had to ask, do I need to bring the USDA in? Do I need to bring the agricultural extension down here? Do I need to call somebody at my bank that use Farm Credit, who gave me some advice on what to do and what not to do because they're holding the mortgage on the property? Do I need to bring in a farm consultant? Because ultimately, we're going to farm hell or high water, and animal safety and security is the most important thing. Another thing about actually having live electricity, because a lot of you guys want to be off grid, is that a little solar charger ain't going to stop a bear. And so we are going to put real live perimeter fences here. The perimeter fences have a notification process. I got to notify the neighbors. They get the option to pay for half my fence. When Trump was saying he's going to build a wall on the southern border and Mexico is going to pay for it, technically, in many states, border fences or boundary fences are paid for and maintained 50-50 with the other properties, because if I put up a good quality fence, they get the benefit of it. And if they put up a good quality fence, I get the benefit of it. So folks, long story short, you want to make sure that you've got your plan in place on paper. Now, I did find out, and I got some great information from the electrical inspector, that I need to make sure that I have better signage at the road, okay, because they went to the wrong house. Not only do I need better signage on the road, I need to have clearly marked trespassing signs, because in order to enforce a criminal trespass, I need to have clear signage. So I have my no hunt purple on the perimeters. I need to have clear signage up front, just like most of my neighbors have up here. And then, of course, you open the woods up like this, you got people four-wheeling back here where they're not supposed to. And so I will have to criminally trespass individuals if they don't respect this. So if you're watching these videos to find out where this land is, and you think you're going to come back here, I'm required by the USDA, I'm required by my insurance company, and I'm required by Virginia laws to criminally trespass anybody who crosses the no hunt purple or comes out onto an active agricultural activity, which this property is an active agricultural activity today. There's foraging of mushrooms going on. There's different sections of land that are different kinds of tree sets for forestry. There are some that we're going to let grow out, some that we're going to thin. Goats are going to be great for thinning things out. There's activities where we're clearing areas, and yes, I am required And I'm going to get all nice and sweaty and go down to the zoning office and make sure we have a clear understanding of how this works. Make sure I got a clear understanding of what their expectations are. But ultimately, I'm required to have somebody here. And when there's nursing animals or birthing going on, they may have to be here 24 hours a day for a week at a time. There are other requirements that I need to make sure I follow. So if we've got wall tents out here glamping in the woods and somebody's living here full time with the animals in an agricultural activity, it is no longer a local zoning issue. It is now a federal and state right to farm. It is a federal and state activity that I've got to follow those rules. Now, what I mean by biosecurity is you got to like dust your stuff off before you leave the property. And before you come on the property, you can't bring soil from other locations. You know, there's some rules to be followed. And I like to follow the rules because the rules are there to help people out. And if the rules are bad, we can change the rules. But ultimately, the inspector saw the way. We got the thing up here. I didn't bother to tell him it's a filming location as well. And on this property, there's a lot of video cameras and other things for the podcast. And if you have questions, I'd be more than happy to do a specific demonstration. We are looking to get our animals soon. I already got a contract coming in place where I might need 28 goats and temporary fencing. And so we want to make sure that we're doing this the right way and that we can bring animals in and out of here with safety, security, and good health for the animal. And also that we are protecting the other forestry activities that are going on. There's a reason we didn't just clear all these woods because there's other activities. And farming ain't easy. I'm not even a real farmer. I'm a pretend farmer who goes and works on other people's farms and who just started establishing this farm, which I'm going to end up being a caretaker of. Which under the Virginia zoning, I forgot what section it is, the caretaker can live on the property, whether it's in temporary housing or other housing, because they are responsible for the property, and they can have a 24-hour, it's a non-occupancy because the building that they're in is not a permanent structure, and that's been verified with lawyers and other people as well. But again, some of this stuff is common sense. Some of it is just having a conversation. So I started out this with the inspector wouldn't let me do such and such. And the real lesson of this is to work with your inspectors. Okay, don't yell at them. Don't get mad at them. Don't say you got to call the FDA and, you know, you're going to, well, the USDA, the FDA doesn't have, unless I was, the Food and Drug Administration would have jurisdiction if I was doing value-added products like milking animals to create cheeses and other stuff like that. But work with them because they are reasonable in most cases. And in most cases, they're going to approve your stuff because they want the economic development. If this farm is good, and I'm working with a number of other farms in this area, we're going to add millions of dollars of economic value to the area. Now, am I going to get millions of dollars? No, I'm probably going to go broke. But the underlying factor is a lot of you guys are out there, don't get frustrated. Just keep on going. Have a conversation with them, listen to the inspectors, find out where they're coming from. And in this case, he gave me the name of a couple people to go talk with because he called down the office and he says, well, they said, I don't remember this guy, starting a farm. I didn't know I had to ask permission to start a farm, which you don't have to. But again, I'm going to go down there as a courtesy call and make sure they know who I am. Then make sure that the address is straight, to make sure it's properly posted on the road so they don't accidentally go to the neighbor's house, to make sure the trespassing signs and the biosecurity signs and all that's there. I'd originally not wanted public signs so that nobody would know there's a farm back here. But evidently I got to broadcast it to the world. And then we're also going to put a posting board out front to put all of our permits. That way they don't have to come back here to get the permits because nobody knows what's back here. Except for you, who's a subscriber, who likes and subscribes and visits us at www.prosperityhomestead.org. That's the end of this podcast episode today. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. Ask your questions. I'd love to answer your questions. And if you need help with laws, rules, and regulations, that is an area that I'm very good at. I work with risk management. I do business development, and we can lay out the guidelines, not legal advice, but we can lay out the guidelines so that when you do work with a lawyer or you do work with your bank or a cooperative in your area, you'll have a better understanding of what's expected. There are reasons I have to criminally trespass, and most of them are health and safety. And health and safety is important to you and your family. It should be important to other folks as well. And again, ask your questions, www.prosperityhomestead.org.